pretty much a garden state, country, and they run.
Get you two in there.
And they run a lot of. At that time, they lived in a walled town, and then they'd go out and work their land because of invaders coming in and that sort of stuff, and the way they'd get protected. So, Grandpa was the third generation of only one boy in the Wasco clan. And Grandpa was extremely shy. Anyway, he got to be, I think, 19, and it was about 1900, and they were conscripting all the males into the Hungarian army, and Grandma and Grandpa were afraid he was going to get killed. So they shipped him out. So he came through Ellis Island and ended up in Cleveland. And I could never figure that out, except there was a huge Hungarian ghetto in Cleveland.
What was your grandpa's name? What's his first name? Sedgwick?
Francis.
Frank.
Yeah, Frank. And anyhow, that got him to Cleveland, and those immigrants, because they couldn't speak much English, took whatever low-paying job you could get, and his was, he went to a mine.
Coal mine.
Down in Colorado, down in Rock Springs. And he got down there in the wintertime, almost froze to death. Grandpa had, I think, low blood pressure most of his life, and was a thinner man, and it just almost killed him. Anyhow, somehow or another, he ended up back in Illinois, a place called Georgetown, Illinois, working in a coal mine there. And right next to him was, quote, someone who wanted to introduce him to his daughter. Well, his daughter was the only girl in her family. And she was, I think, 3 years younger than Grandpa. Grandpa was 19 and she was 16. And one thing led to another, they got married. He continued to work in the mines for 10 years, and at the end of 10 years, they had 8 children, my dad being the youngest. And they looked at each other and they said, this is no place to raise a family. In a coal mine. Plus the fact he'd been a part of 3 cave-ins. The last one landed on his chest. And he said, I ain't going back in and doing that again. So he went looking for some farmland. Somehow or another, he had $1,000. Now, how he got that, I do not know. That would have been $1912.
Yeah, that
was a
lot of money.
Anyhow, there was some Mississippi bottom land that he could have gotten for that price, but they'd been flat broke. And so they heard about if you could homestead, and went to Arkansas, to the end of the road, and got 80 acres free given to him if he would settle it and live on it. It was mostly rocks and bluffs, and very little land to grow anything on. Yes, dear.
How many children did they end up with?
They ended up eventually having 18 children, 17 pregnancies, over 30 years. The most alive at any one time was 15. And one story of that, they never had an outhouse.
That
is...
And it contaminated the drinking water.
Yeah.
And Grandma got typhoid fever, and the youngest girl, who was 4, got it too. And Grandma was pregnant, and the baby was a boy by the name of Andrew, was stillborn. So 2 out of 3 of them, Grandma almost died. And that led to Grandpa planting grapes, 7.5 acres of grapes in those Ozarks, which was unheard of. Nobody knew about it. But they raised those grapes, and at that time you could make 100 gallons of wine for your own use every year. So that's what they did. To pick their grapes, they would ask the neighbors to come in and help. And at the end of the day, the neighbors would take a bushel load of grapes home, and that was their pay.
But then the wine became what they drank instead of water.
Or they added,
kids and all.
Or added it to the water to purify the water.
Yeah, wasn't it back like Europe, 1900s or something, most things were alcoholic to some degree to kill most
To
of the
kill.
contaminants.
Trying to, yeah, there was so much of it. I asked Dad one time, I said, first of all, they all survived, as many as did. I said, what'd you do for a doctor? Of course, a doctor was unheard of where they were. And I said, well, when you got sick, what did they do for you? Well, if it was with the chest, they'd put a mustard plaster on you. Well, that heats up the chest. I mean,
Yeah.
it really does. And if you're not careful, you can blister the skin. You get first and second degree burns pretty easily. If it was a puncture, you stepped on, and that's pretty common, then they would soak it in turpentine.
Ow.
And if you had a cough, they'd mix coal oil with a little sugar, and that would cure your cough.
Kill you or cure you, you know that expression. It's
Yeah, I mean,
kill you or cure
yeah.
you.
And I'm sure there were some native remedies there too. But I thought, oh, you guys survived all that stuff, you know. And one of my uncles got bitten by a snake, and they poulticed it and everything else. I guess it swelled up really big, and it was John. He eventually came out of it. Of course, they said he could smell a snake a mile away. If there was any kind of a snake, boy, he knew where it was. And the oldest, there were three of them within a year of each other. Servac was his name, and they called him Sedowat, some way that, I don't know. Anyhow, he decided he would make a zip gun. It was kind of like a black powder pistol. So he had a pipe, and he hooked it all together, fired off around it, backfired into his face, and damn near killed him. The pipe banged him in the head, and I said, what did you guys do? Well, we cleaned him up as best we could and went home. And Grandma said, you okay? And that's it. And away they went. They just acted as if that's the way it's supposed to have been.
I mean, yeah, when you don't have much of a doctor out there, then you live and die. That's probably
That was
was
it.
the norm.
And I asked Dad, I said, were you ever part of somebody dying down there? Yeah, about 3 people. His sister who died from typhoid died in his arms. And he buried her, helped bury her. One of the neighbors, and he helped build a casket for him, because you don't have that in the mountains there. And then a third guy, he was so huge, they had to almost detonate the toilet to get him out of there. And that was, and I said, what did you guys do? Well, we dug. You had to get them in the ground within a couple of days, because the smell would get pretty bad, just
Yeah.
where they were. Stories.
Okay.
And Sherry's dad was born in Texas and raised in Pumpkin Center.
And went to high school in Odessa, Texas.
That was a letter story.
Okay.
He
He's
and
going to
his,
tell the football story.
he-
It's about my dad.
anyhow, he and his brother were a year apart, and his brother was a big, strong kid too.
Keith.
Keith was probably 2 inches taller and the same size, and they were both just kind of rugged guys. Well, they just playing the neighborhood teams, they'd knocking the hell out of him. Anyhow, they played this next team, and they just butchered him. And the coach there knew he had a friend, a guy that he knew was the coach at Odessa. So he calls up the coach at Odessa. He said, "Listen," he said, "I got a couple of kids in this neighboring town who can play for you, but their dad needs a job." So they offered Grandpa the job of being a custodian
At the high school.
at the high school. His job was to take care of the football field, drive the team bus, and that was pretty much it, as far as we know. And when it came to care for mowing the football field, he'd play mumbly peg with the football players.
Do you know what mumbly pig is?
I'm not.
Mumbly pig is you start out, you each have, or there's just one knife probably.
Yeah.
And then I throw the knife and it sticks into the ground, then you got to put your foot there. And then you take the knife and you throw it, and then I got to put mine, and the last one standing wins. And so
But the knife has to stick, and the trick could be too, some played it how close you would come to the other person's foot and not hit them.
Make
That
them
got a little
jump.
tricky.
But the more was the idea of getting them to do the
So
splits.
he would play, and if they lost, they'd have to do a lap or two with him more.
Yeah, right. Because my grandpa was really good playing mummy peg, so it was the way he got the football field mowed by playing.
So his two sons were bigger than he was, and so they called Grandpa Shorty.
Yeah, my grandpa was Grandpa Shorty, and that's all I knew him by. But his name was James, and everything. But we knew him by Shorty. And what was the bet that they would make? They lived up a hill, and Keith and my dad. So you've got Keith, my dad, and their dad, Shorty. And they would make bets, and if the dad lost, he had to carry him up the hill on his back. And he lost all the time. But the football in Odessa, Texas was like the movie Friday Night Lights. I mean, and if you've not seen that, that's about how serious Texas football is.
Odessa, at the time that Ray was there, the town had 4,000 people. They averaged 6,000 at their football games. They literally shut the town down. Said, we're gone to the football game.
Right.
And you couldn't, raise anybody because they were at the football. And I said, now I've been around football, but shutting down towns to play a football game, that's way out of my league. They played a district playoff in Sweetwater. 15,000 people were there. A high school regional football game. I said, God have mercy on us. What was that all about? Well, it was next to God, football was right there.
So we could go down the vein of football. Because Dad then, after when he went to high school, then...
Well, his high school career is really fun. I said, we were talking one time, and I learned that in home ec. I learned that in something else. I said, Ray, how did you get in home ec and all that? He said, well, I'd taken everything else. It was his fifth year. He wasn't 18. And in Texas, you can play football as long as you were clear until you were 18. So he got 5 years of high school football. At first, I thought it was a bunch of BS, and then years later, I found his
yearbook.
Actually, it was a copy of his high school record.
Oh, yeah.
And it was over 5 years. He would fail the last semester of English.
Of senior English.
2 years in a row, so that he was still eligible to play. Anyhow, off his football team, they must have been a hell for unbelievable. There were 11 of them who were seniors who ended up going over to Texas Western. Of those 11, 8 ended up starting for Texas Western. Of those 8 who started, 4 ended up playing in the NFL.
And as you know, my dad played for the 49ers because all of us now that the 49ers are in the Super Bowl are hanging on to his shirt tail. Claiming our ounce of fame from my dad's time with the 49ers. But what I wanted to share too, that's I think important part of our family history, is that before I was born, my dad was in the Navy, because I was born during World War II, and he was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, which is a big naval base, and so he and Mom were there during those pre-war years type of thing, and their big concern was that they would not get back to Texas when Mom became pregnant for me to be born a Texan. I mean, it was a big deal, even if my mom was going to have to go back to Texas alone so that I would be born a Texan. My dad ended up... I want you to understand that, I think, so you understand how important being a Texan is.
Yeah, like...
And so we went back, and I was born in Odessa, Texas. And
then your dad went to California and got shipped out.
Yeah, then Dad went to California and he was shipped out in the Navy. And then I didn't see him again until I was a little bit older.
I think you were 2.
Yeah, I was 2 years old. And then he came back and went back to school at Texas Western, which is now University of Texas in El Paso. and we, at that time, they built, because after the war and all of the returning vets, they built these big, or had these old army barracks that were student housing for the married students. And so that's what we lived in, and I was the first post-war baby to live in those houses.
In Vet Village.
In Vet Village, they called it. But anyway, what I kind of wanted to say about that is we joke, about being a Texan, but very, very seriously, that has had a really strong effect on me and who I am and what I've hoped to pass on, to the children.
Yeah.
Because hospitality is huge. Having people come into your home and feel welcome and all of that kind of stuff. So hospitality is really important. Respecting your elders. I really grew up with yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am. Anybody that was older than I called Mr. or Mrs., unless they gave me permission to call them by their first name. And only then my dad would kind of raise an eyebrow and say, I don't know, Sherry, you really should be referring to Mr. Aldrich, and whatever, instead of Bill. And traditions of New Year's Day dinner, you have to have black-eyed peas for luck for the New Year.
Well, and cornbread.
Yes, but the black-eyed peas or collard greens and cornbread and those kind of things. I've been known to go down on New Year's Day to Safeway and buy 1 can of black-eyed peas because I hadn't had time to make any, so that we would have black-eyed peas.
That was for good luck for the year.
For good luck, to have just 1 bite of black-eyed peas and you were covered for the new year.
Covered for the year.
And I still, to this day, and I have, Grandpa and I have been married 56 years and we've never missed a New Year's without black-eyed peas.
I've not heard that one where black-eyed peas on the New Year gives good luck.
That's very much a Southern
That's
thing.
very Southern.
Very, very Southern.
Yeah. It's interesting when Ray came back to finish college. He's a bright enough guy. He finished in right at 3 years, and this is the part that's I find amazing. His senior year, he was like student body president because I think he made some money, $1,500 for the year being student body president. Part of his scholarship was he could have work, so he had to work. He worked 40 hours a week while he punched in and punched out.
Did not really
He
work.
never had to work. He just had to make sure he punched in. So he made 40 hours a week wages plus that, plus his football scholarship. And so when he signed to play in the NFL, he told me he took a cut in salary of about 15.
Yeah, I mean, when you've got the system working for you,
Yeah, and he did.
and have to be honest.
It was all of the kind of, I don't know if you want to say the dark side, but the non-sporting side of athletics that
It's called we're competing. Anyhow, the part I find the most amazing in all of that, his senior year, up until that time, the school was known as University of Texas Mines and Metallurgy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a mouthful. And they said, they petitioned to change the name of the university, and it became Texas Western University. And it stayed that way until all the universities in Texas, University of Texas at El Paso, University of Texas, San Antonio, that kind of stuff. He thought that was a major deal, because the student body got behind it and they supported it, and it got taken care of. There were, of those, those guys that he played ball with in El Paso, another extended part of the story. Ray died in the summer
2008.
In 2008, and that was the 75th year of the Sun Bowl. And they were announcing all-stars from the Sun Bowl ball games all the time.
75 all-stars.
Ray was one of them.
Yeah, I remember that.
Anyhow, we go down there, and we're greeted by one of his former teammates at Odessa. And then we found out there were 2 or 3 others there. And they had stayed friends since high school. They called each other, were there for each other's weddings, everything else. Had come up and tried to help Ray when he was in trouble up in Salt Lake. I couldn't believe it. It was something like 65 years those guys had been friends. And had stayed. 8 of them went in the Navy and came back alive during Second World War, which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I thought that friendship to last that long was something else.
I mean,
Anyhow, the housing for them as a family when they moved from Pumpkin Center, Texas to Odessa, the ag class had built this 2-bedroom house, and it was right there next to the school. That's where they lived. There were 4 kids and the parents, and evidently there were some others that bunked in with them too. I think Jack did in his senior year. And I thought, how did Grandma know who was coming for dinner? Because that was pretty common, like we say, hospitality and feed the troops and all the rest of that stuff.
yeah, you get a big pot.
Keep adding to it.
Keep adding
Yeah.
to it.
You got to talk about your mom and where she came from.
That's what I was gonna say, because that's that story that I really want to have live on, because my mom was 14 when her mother and her dad and her oldest brother died in 3 separate accidents.
3 separate incidents.
Three different, all in that her 14th year of life. Major trauma. So that left her with one brother who was
He was married at that time.
yeah, married, and then a younger brother that was a few years younger than she was. And so at that time she went to live with her older brother and his wife, who had just gotten married and weren't just real thrilled about having these
Odessa, Texas.
kids.
Yeah.
Well, at that time, that's when she met my dad. And so she and Dad got married. She turned
She was 15 and a half when they got married.
15. Her birthday was May 24th.
Oh, that's right.
And so basically she had just turned 15, and then they got married April 5th. That was their wedding anniversary.
That would have been,
Because I was thinking, because she got married at 15, her daughter Melinda got married at 15,
that's
and then that is my sister Melinda, and then her daughter got married at 15. So we have 3 generations, and a lot of heartache,
Yeah.
drug and alcohol use in those situations. But her mom's name was Tookabel, and
Tookabel was a half-breed Cherokee.
yeah, and she was half-breed Cherokee, and so she was registered with the state of Oklahoma when the state of Oklahoma registered all of the Cherokee
All the Indians.
Descendants.
So, and that's what also supposedly one of our relatives, who was a red-headed Irishman,
I think it was your great-grandpa.
went in and registered as a half-breed. So his names were on the roll
As a half-breed.
as a half-breed, as a Cherokee. And so one of the memories that I have is my dad coming home from work one time, and my mom's all painted up like an Indian, and had bought a feather hat, and she danced around the living room. She was sober too. And she said, he said, "What is going on?" And she said, "My Indian money came in. My Indian money. They paid off the Indians, the state of Oklahoma, and I got my check today." He's like, "Oh, good. How much?" $213. He said, "What? You mean I've lived with you all these years waiting for your Indian money to come in? It's $213. So I'll never forget that. But it was kind of a big deal.
It was a big deal.
And I had an uncle or a grandfather, great grandfather, I think, that maybe it was a great-great-grandfather that rode during the Civil War as a Cherokee. He was a Cherokee and rode on the Union side
Confederates.
because the Cherokees also had slaves during that period of time. So
If you look back in terms of
it's really kind of interesting, you
her
know.
mother's side of the family, Tuckerbell was a half-breed, and it wasn't Spavinaw.
Yeah.
Spavinaw, Oklahoma is where they were living, and I think she was one of 8 kids. As best I can remember, we've never picked up whatever happened with those brothers and sisters, but supposedly her grandma and her couple of her sisters loved to go to these tent meetings, camp meetings, where the Pentecostal kind of stuff.
Praise the Lord!
And come
Slain in the spirit.
and come to find out, her grandma was quite a musician. She played the organ and piano in a couple of churches every week, and I said, "Wow! I mean, that's no simple task." So there's that love of music comes out of there. But if you trace them back, the Cherokee go clear back to the hills in North Carolina and Georgia and Kentucky, that area, back in the Appalachians. And of all of they were the first tribe that had their own language, had their own newspaper, had their own alphabet.
Do you have a cord?
Yes, I do.
Okay, because we got to plug in.